Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we finally have a game to preview as the Bucks begin their post-All-Star break schedule with another tough game, the story of the second half stretch in Minnesota against the Timberwolves. We'll take a look at that game, but more importantly, the final 26 games. Where can it turn around? Where could it possibly go worse? We'll dive into the scenarios for the Bucks coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Bucks. I am Justin Garcia, joined by Camille Davis. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network. You can find Camille on the Technical File podcast and the Carry the G in MKE podcast. We both thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and viewable as well on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That is linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. 26 games remain for the Bucks, Camille, and we briefly touched on this on the show yesterday, but you're 9 games back of the Celtics in the loss column. You're not catching Boston. With the schedule the Celtics have left, with the schedule you have left, even catching Cleveland is going to be very challenging for the Bucks. You're 4 games back of the Cavs in the loss column. The good news, bad news, you don't have the tiebreaker. You didn't lose the tiebreaker. And head-to-head against Cleveland, which would have been helpful to win that tiebreaker and avoid that 40-point loss in Cleveland in this scenario. But 4 games to make up with a more challenging schedule than the Cavaliers have. And the other thing to point out, we talked about this earlier, is Bucks are 9-7 in divisional games. You know, there were years where the Bucks would lose 1 or 2 games against the Central Division. They're 9-7. They only have 1 game left. That is against the Bulls, where the Bucks have had a spotty track record in recent years. Cavs have 4 games left, and they're currently 8-4. So not only do you need to outplay the Cavaliers if you're looking to move up to that 2 spot, not only do you need to outplay the Cavaliers down the stretch, you would also need to win in Chicago 1 week from today, and you would need the Cavs to go 1-3 in those remaining divisional games. I believe 2 are against the Pistons, and you have 1 against the Pacers and 1 against the Bulls. So not exactly a likely scenario. I point all this out to say, look, where you are at third, I think the operative and the goal for the second half is to not only see some of those things we've talked about through the week and just the optics look better, especially offensively, but don't lose ground. You're probably not moving up to 2. That's fine. Don't drop to 4.
Yeah, and hey, and if you are trying to get the 2, then you're going to have to play some ball. But when you look at the teams that are even behind the Bucks, because you highlighted the Celtics and the Cavaliers in front of them, like you have the Knicks at 33-22, so they're 1 back in the loss column from the Bucks. And then you have the 76ers who are 32-22, a loss back in the loss column.
Right. With everything they've gone through, which is
exactly and they're
startling, maybe a
there.
bit strong, but yeah, that's 1 game separating you, and they're going to still be playing for a couple of weeks without Joel Embiid.
Exactly. And the Bucks see Philly on Sunday. So like that's one of those games where you're like, I know Joel Embiid isn't going to be there, but we have seen that the 76ers have been able to still find a way to stay connected to the rest of the teams in the East in the standings. Like over their last 10, like the Bucks, the 76ers are 3-7. So they're going to be trying to look coming out of the break as well to get on that winning streak. Meanwhile, the Knicks have been 5-5 over their last 10. They lost 4 in a row heading into the break, which of course was all great news and great things to hear as a Bucks fan. But, you know, if the Knicks start getting healthier, they're going to be figuring things out as well. So you can't take them lightly going forward either. And we know we talk about the Pacers and the Heat. Both of them are in the 25 loss column. So the Pacers are 31-25. The Heat are 30-25. Like that could be a really bad week and a really good week happening at the same time for both of those teams. And next thing you know, they're also in the conversation of trying to crack into the top 4 in the East. So like it's going to be crowded. It's going to be a lot of different competition going on in the sense of like looking who's around you and trying to take care of business in front of you, but also doing a little scoreboard watching while trying to move up into the standings, because as we know, the playoff matchups are going to be really interesting in the East, and some matchups for the Bucks are going to be better than others. And you don't want to put yourself in a position where if it does come down to a game 7, you're going to be on the road, especially in the first round.
We will get into best case and worst case scenarios in the second segment here for this team as a whole. But the little snapper, Steve Jones Jr., pointed out, and you brought this up to me, Camille, on Twitter, asking every single fan base to lay out second half here, your biggest concern for your team, the biggest question you have, and what's the most underrated thing about your team. We both kind of said before, man, I don't know what's underrated about this Bucks team. I suppose we could lean on what we talked about a little bit on yesterday's show, and that, well, maybe the Giannis Dame pick and roll is underrated, and that'll get going in the second half here for this team. But just looking at those first two, biggest concern for the Bucks. I suppose I'll start and get yours, but I'll just say the biggest concern would be that the version you saw of Damian Lillard is what Damian Lillard is going to give you again in the second half.
I think that is a very legit biggest concern to have, because I would agree with that in large part because a lot of this, and by this, I mean how this Milwaukee Bucks team is constructed to work, is around Dame being Damian Lillard. Like that's what this team needs. Like when you trade out defense for offense, if we're putting it as plainly as you can, thinking of the Drew Holiday, Damian Lillard trade, you're expecting that offensive firepower to come through. And we saw the numbers. We saw how it looks when Dame is electric and when Dame is shooting really well. In December, he was shooting a little bit over 43% from 3. And the Bucks record in December was just a work of beauty. Again, the competition does matter within that, but Dame was shooting the ball really well, and that's going to be very important for this team. But if I had to say something other than Dame, since you used that one, I would also just point to just the coaching transition, because with this, we've heard the players talking about the fact that, hey, we know the wins aren't coming, but the process is right. Trust us, like it's going to come around, it's going to come around, which is somewhat opposite of what you were hearing earlier on in the season, which is kind of like, well, like after wins, it's like, hey, we got to get our effort up. What are we good at? What does our defense do? What's our identity? Like there were questions around what they're doing, but it seems that under Doc, they believe in what the process is going to be. We just haven't seen the results yet. And for me, it's like, what if those results don't come? And it's just like you're seeing the defense, hey, it's playing a little bit better, but the offense stays down there at 20th or whatever the case may be. I don't think that's likely. I'm hoping that's not likely. But if things like fall apart, or as I mentioned yesterday's show, you add in that part with the fact that there is more media attention around the Bucks in a different way than what we've seen before, just in nature of the personalities that are on this team. When you have a guy on your team with a successful podcast that he is going to be promoting, I mean, his very first game, that's what he yelled in his post-game interview. Like,
I'm sorry, are you talking about Thanasis or Pat Beverly?
See, Thanasis got his through the Bucks Plus, so he's gonna have to keep a little bit more buttoned up than what Pat Bev does. But no, I mean that's another point where you're like, there's a tension around this team. We know that Doc is a great media guy. He likes talking to the media. He's been in the news himself. So for me, I would say just worst case is like, what if this is the actual, like, what if it doesn't, the process doesn't actually result in the results that we thought that it could, or that they're showing the potential to have. I don't think that's super likely, but it is in the back of my head of like, what if this is, we're just coming down at this point.
Don't feel like you have to give a different answer of what I give here, because there isn't a whole lot. I think we know about, we're all kind of going to be on the same page about this team here. The second question that we mentioned, so the big one is going to be Dame. You provided a secondary one there, but in terms of your concern that we do see the Damian Lillard you expected, and again, we've talked about this throughout the season, it's not piling on. I know there's a lot that's going on And overall, Damian Lillard has been good, but you made the trade for the Damian Lillard that we saw in Portland and for the guy hitting the walk-off shot against the Thunder and those moments. And you've gotten some of them. The final 26 games, you're looking to get that more consistently. The second question, the biggest question for this team, I'll start it off again. And to me, it's as simple as, what are the rotations? And what's the closing group under Doc Rivers? We knew what to expect under Bud. It seemed like at times it was fluid early under Adrian Griffin, and then it just kind of settled into, because early on we saw moments where Brook Lopez wasn't closing again and the Bucks were playing small, and then it shifted back to what we saw under Bud. So number one, how does this team close games? And a lot of that is going to have to do with health of Chris Middleton and Jay Crowder continuing to stay healthy, but also some of those names, as we still wait for the official word, but we're assuming a certain power forward that can knock down threes is joining this team for the second half. What does that mean with Pat Beverly, with Danilo Gallinari? How does that change some of the minutes for some of these other guys? And who's going to be left out? Because Doc Rivers made the joke earlier, too, when he was asked about playing guys, and I think it was 10 of, playing only that many guys. And Doc Rivers' response was, well, because it's the regular season, it's going to get even shorter when we get to the postseason. So who are those names that are left off when we get to the playoffs?
Yeah, that's definitely one for me as well. And just thinking playoff, because one of my things with Doc Rivers, which I saw a similarity in his coaching style to Mike Budenholzer's, is like, come playoff time, what are those adjustments going to be looking like for this team? And how quickly are we going to be able to make those adjustments? Now, the playoff rotation is something that's going to be very interesting, because Doc does seem like a guy who's going to want to keep that a pretty short rotation, 7, maybe 8 guys going forward.
And a lot of experience too.
Exactly. And another, like, we know earlier in the season, there was a lot of hype around the young Bucks, right? Trying to say like, hey, let's get MarJon some burn. Hey, let's see what Andre Jackson Jr. can do. Let's see what AJ Green can do. But with the additions that this team has made, it seems as if those guys probably won't crack that playoff rotation, just given the number of vets in front of them, and what Doc has said about, for example, Pat Connaughton, and wanting to get his confidence higher and knowing that Pat can play a crucial role for this team. So it's also that aspect of it as well, where it's like, hey, there are going to be some people I know still going like, we should see what they can do. And AJ Green has shown in some of his time, like, I think like I can be a positive contributor on this team if I'm given minutes. So I'll be interested to see as the regular season goes on, if some of these vets might be able to quote unquote lose that spot to somebody who is coming on. And AJ Green seems like that young guy who might be in position to do it, which is so interesting, because at the beginning of the season, it was all MarJon or Andre Jackson Jr. back and forth. And AJ Green has come in, shot the ball pretty well. And on defense hasn't looked just like a turnstile. Like, he's playing with effort. He's keeping guys in front of him for the most part. So it'll be interesting to see their playing time the rest of the season. And then come playoff time, like you mentioned, what does that rotation look like? And how does I'm so used to saying that. How does Doc adjust come playoff time with the various matchups that are going to be in front of this team?
Yeah, the young guys is the interesting part, because AJ has clearly started to carve out a spot here. And I think a lot of Bucks fans have kind of come around on that too, of, if he's going to hold up and just hold his own defensively, as he was doing in the final, 2 weeks going into the All-Star break, if he can give you that, where he's at least not a negative defensively, and Doc has praised his toughness and that he fights through screens. If he does that, the one thing he brings to the table, I think we'd agree MarJon is the better offensive player when looking at MarJon and Andre specifically. Andre is a better defensive player, but the shooting of AJ Green, that individual skill is better than any skill set that either of those two bring to the table. So that's going to be the big thing to monitor, or one of them in the second half, is these minutes, the rotations, especially in the playoffs. It's not just Doc and Bud. A lot of veteran coaches lean on veteran players. It takes a while for young guys to crack it. But the Bucks also may be in a spot where we need one of these young guys to crack it, because we are an older team and we need some athleticism on the perimeter. So that would be the big question for this team going into the playoffs. We mentioned we gloss over what's underrated about your team. I suppose we could say Giannis, coming off the conversation we had right yesterday of if he's still this far back in the MVP, despite these numbers, I think Giannis is probably what's underrated about this Bucks team. We mentioned too, best case and worst case scenarios. Best case scenario is pretty easy, and that's they win a title. So we'll remove that part from it. Not so much the overall success, but best case for these 26 games. We'll get into that, and a worst case scenario for the Bucks as well, coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, that instant confidence boost you get from an outfit that makes you look really good. That's what you can get with Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, size, your budget. They do all the shopping for you. It is the easiest way to update your wardrobe this season and any season. You can easily upgrade that wardrobe with a professional stylist that helps you find new on-trend favorites that'll work for you. Your stylist will always send just the right pieces where the fit is on point. It's like they have style ESP. I don't know how they do it, but they just do it. Stitch Fix makes it all so easy. I don't like to shop all that often, and they find me what I'm looking for. They get you that time and effort that you save. Plus, you can get outfits that make you look and feel really good. If you don't like something, just send it back. Shipping, returns, and exchanges are always free. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That's stitchfix.com/lockedon. stitchfix.com/lockedon. And as a reminder, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and you can also find it on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today, covering all the top stories 24/7. Local experts have Locked On, in addition to all the national shows. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, I mentioned best case and worst case scenarios. We won't make it so easy and say, hey, best case is the Bucks win the title.
Because of course.
Best case scenario, boy, this is a stretch, but I'm inclined to say the best case scenario is you stay at third in the standings and the offense gets back to where we saw earlier in the season, and you can finish in the top 15 defensively. I think if you wanted to be even greedier, you can say, hey, the Cavs hit a bit of a stumble and you play very well against your schedule and you get up to second. But I still think being realistic here, best case is you're still going to be third, but it's those optics of offense starts to come together. That pick and roll in the two-man game we talked about, maybe a player who we're still waiting on the official word from can give you some spacing and scoring off the bench, which has been an issue for this team this season. But most importantly, that defense is up to 17th, I think, for the overall season numbers. If you can get it up to 15th, even for the full season numbers, and the numbers post-doc still hover around 10. To me, that's probably what you're looking for best case.
Yeah, I think the Bucks could get the second. Like, there's a world in which they could get that second seed. So if we're talking,
it's not impossible. Right. It's going to be tough. It's almost impossible to get one.
For sure. So if they could do that, and then, I mean, if best case scenario, Bucks get the 2 seed here, that means they're winning a lot of games coming out of this break, meaning that I would assume that, like you said, the defensive rating is holding pretty strong. They're playing better defense, and the offense is coming up as well. Within that, as we mentioned in the first segment, like Dame is playing better. He's shooting at a more consistent clip. And then best case scenario, Giannis also gets himself into the MVP conversation. And he's able to make some noise in there. But with this Bucks team and the schedule that they have coming up, like, best case is you don't fall past 3 for sure. Like that's the floor for this team. I think they can get to 2, but you want to see the offense coming around and you want to see that defense holding steady. And then I'll also just add in the fact that best case scenario, they're healthy. Like Chris Middleton comes back soon from his injury, and that his reacclimation time back into the team isn't that long for him. Like, that's the hope as well for best case scenario for me, is that when Chris comes back into this rotation, into this lineup, that he's able to kind of get the ball rolling pretty well, because when he got injured, he was playing well. And I hate the fact that people are making jokes or tomorrow, oh, well, Chris Middleton, he can't stay healthy, when it's like he was shooting a three and the guy put his foot underneath him. Like, what else could he do in that situation? Like, he was playing basketball and someone put their foot underneath him. So that is what it is. So I definitely got to include Chris Middleton's health and coming back, reacclimating to this team in a way that is quick and seamless based on what they've been building so far under Dot.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say freak injuries, but it's as close as you get when you think about the thumb issue that Chris had, or the wrist issue, I should say.
The hamstring.
It's the hand. It starts with slipping on a wet spot against the
Right.
Bulls and that knee injury, and then here Kevin Durant coming down in his landing zone, contesting a three. So it's tough to say Chris can't stay healthy when those are the types of injuries that he's been picking up. Again, it's not impossible. It's going to be very tough to get up to 2. So what, 54, 55 wins is probably what you're going to need for that 2 seed. So if it's 55, Bucks got to win 20 of their final 26 games. So you got to go 20-6 against that schedule. And not only that, you would need the Cavaliers to, in 55, you need them to get to 54 for the divisional reasons we laid out in tiebreakers. So Cleveland, with their 29 games left, would have to go 18-11. It's not that difficult, but again, it's a relatively easy schedule that the Cavs have, and that's just not the win percentage they've been playing to so far this season. So that's going to be the tough part. The getting that number of wins is what's going to be challenging for the Bucks. And I guess, supposed to tie it together, what we talked about yesterday, that's the other thing, is if the Bucks kind of seal themselves off at 3, I think that's another reason why you don't see as much attention for Giannis in the MVP race. If you finish with the second best record, yeah, you're going to get a lot of attention, even if he still finishes, which is possible. If the Bucks finish with a better record than the Nuggets or the Thunder, then I'll be curious, especially if it's a 20-6 second half here for the Bucks. Then you got a real big chance here, but it's the rest of it that makes it challenging. I'm assuming we're going to be aligned on this one too, in worst case scenario for the Bucks, but I do want to spend a little bit more time on that coming up after the break. So the best case, is, as we kind of agreed on, has more to do with the optics than anything else. Worst case scenario, the optics come into play there as well, but there are some other factors. We'll discuss that coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we are going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. Let's see who Josh has picked out for this week's eBay Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Player of the Week. The name that stands out the most here is Benedict Mathurin. Buddy Hield was traded just at the deadline before the All-Star break to Philadelphia. It opens up some more time for Benedict Mathurin, who has been a scoring machine off the bench for the Indiana Pacers. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake light kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit available to U.S. customers only. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, worst case scenario to get to the doom and gloom portion of the show. Look, I think first and foremost, the worst case scenario for the Bucks, it is a complicated scenario. But it's one I've referenced before, and that is, I suppose, number one, the optics come into it as well. We see some defensive regression. You don't see the offense start to click. The schedule, and this is a lot that we're throwing out there, the schedule starts to add up where you think, man, now you're really seeing the effects of a challenging schedule. And it all leads to this, Camille. The Bucks end up finishing on that 4-5 line. You have the 76ers as your first round opponent. Joel Embiid either just returns or is returning for the postseason. So the path in front of you is a first round matchup against the 76ers, something Bucks fans have always wanted. Though in this scenario, I don't think you want it in the first round, I should say. A first round opponent in the Philadelphia 76ers and Joel Embiid, a second round matchup with the Boston Celtics, and then a conference finals, if you can get through it, against whoever is left on the other side of the bracket. To me, I stop short of saying doomsday, but that is a very, very bad scenario for the Bucks.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said. The only way I could make that worse is if somehow the Bucks fell into the play-in, which I like. That's the only way I could make it worse without speaking injury.
I guess let's just say this. What % chance would you put? Because I've seen a lot of that where we rush to reaction of this team's going to finish in the play-in tournament. I'm assuming you don't think they'll slide that far, but no. How likely is it?
Again, so if you look at the standings, the Bucks 35-21. Behind them, you have the Knicks at 33-22, the 76ers at 32-22, the Pacers at 31-25. And then
you're 4 up in the loss column right now on the Heat, who are in that first play-in spot, and you do have the head-to-head tiebreaker
with them. So like a likely chance, like maybe 10%, maybe 15%, like it could happen. I don't think it's super likely to happen, but like if we're talking worst case scenario, everything's going wrong and they end up in the play-in in a season where they've shown how urgent it is for them to compete for a championship. The fact that they're paying 3 head coaches, the fact that they've made all these different moves, they're all in and they're trying to get something done now. So to see a championship team fall into the play-in, like that's the only way I could make what you say any worse. And it's on the table, like could happen. I don't think it's as likely to happen as what you mentioned, like being 4-5, but given the fact they're only a handful of games up in the loss column over those teams that straddle that line for playing, like it's on the table.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it's the same separation we're talking about the Bucks from the Cavs. I understand that the other caveat is the Bucks have a much more challenging schedule than the Cavs do. And again, the Bucks have the most difficult schedule left in the Eastern Conference, third most challenging in the league as a whole. So all of these teams have an easier path than you. The Magic have the easiest schedule left in the league. And right now, Orlando is also 4 games back of the Bucks in the loss column. So it has a lot of similarities. It's not a perfect scenario, but it has a lot of those similarities to what we just laid out of here's why it's going to be challenging to catch Cleveland. It's almost the same for those teams that are in the 7th spot to get up to where the Bucks are, 7 and 8 right now, to get to where the Bucks are. The small piece to add is, well, they have an easier schedule than the Bucks.
Right. Which aids in there, like, hey, it's a chance for us to get up here. But like the schedule piece is the one, like if the Bucks didn't have the toughest schedule, I'd have a lot more confidence in that. Like, hey, listen, look at what's in front of them, what they have to do here. But with who they have coming up, and I mean, starting with tonight against the Timberwolves at home, which, by the way, the game's on WMLW. I love that the Bucks are going to be on broadcast TV again. Reminds me of like the UPN days when I was growing up. So I'm happy about that. But like that's a big piece in it, just the fact of how difficult their schedule is. At this point of the recording, we don't have any update on Chris Middleton's return to action ahead of the break. Doc Rivers mentioned like it was going to be a minute. Like we don't expect to see him back at this point.
I would assume, not to cut you off, but as you mentioned, as we tape this, it's not out yet. The Bucks haven't released their injury report. I would assume he's not playing, given the way some of the comments we heard going into it of where Doc and Giannis and a few people had mentioned, we're hopeful it can be after the All-Star break. Maybe it's a couple of games after. The fact that you add that couching piece leads me to believe I would be surprised if we see him this weekend, Friday in Minnesota and then Sunday in Philadelphia. But I don't think, just reading between the lines, I don't think it's anything that's going to extend 2 or 3 weeks into this second half schedule.
Oh, that's a positive for sure. So like you need that. Like we need Chris Middleton to be healthy on this Bucks team. Although there are some people who are going to lament the fact, like, do we really need Chris Middleton? Yes, the Bucks absolutely need Chris Middleton. So him coming back is going to be a big piece for them as well as they go down this final stretch. And of course, everything else that we've mentioned. Dame knocking down the shots that he's getting, the two-man game between Giannis and Dame improving, seeing other ways that they get creative and finding ways to get Dame into space in areas on the court where he's comfortable to operate out of. So like this team coming out of the break, and the only thing I would add on to that is just seeing how much they want it. Like that's something Giannis was talking about ahead of the break after the Memphis debacle, I would say, of losing that game in the fashion that they did against who the Memphis Grizzlies had on their roster at that time. But he mentioned the fact that we've been saying, we want to win a championship. We've been saying we are focused on a championship, but now we need to see it put into action. Is everyone going to do the little things that it's going to take in order to get us over the top? So like we have to see the Bucks come up with a level of urgency as well over these last 26 games and have that play back it up.
They have the Timberwolves to open things up. Minnesota enters this game on a 4-game win streak. That streak started in Milwaukee when they thrashed the Bucks, who albeit were shorthanded. But this is a very interesting team in the Timberwolves in that you got to go back to January 10th as the last time that and really I'd take it a step further and go back to the 7th when they lost in Dallas to the Mavericks by 7 points. They've had very few number one losses, but even still losses that were by more than basically a single possession. They lost by 7. That was an overtime loss, though, in Boston to the Celtics. They lost by 5, so by 2 possessions to the Thunder. They lost by 3 to the Charlotte Hornets. They lost by 1 to the Spurs. And the optics of losing those 2 teams, not great, but they weren't blown out. Lost by 2 to the Orlando Magic, and then again a 6-point loss in overtime to the Bulls. So they've been winning or playing heavily contested games for going on 2 months now, have the Timberwolves. And it's a Bucks team that's been the opposite, that there's been a lot of up and down, and we've seen that against this Timberwolves team. So number one, you got to be healthy. But I mean, I hesitate to even ask this. Do the Bucks have to win on Friday night, given the optics and everything else we've discussed and what you need in the second half? Is this the overreaction of it's a must-win game? You got to come out of the All-Star break looking good and beat the Timberwolves.
That's the pressure that's going to be on them, especially given the way that they went into the break. I think had they not gone into the break with that Memphis loss, there wouldn't be as much urgency on this particular game of seeing how they're going to look coming out of the break. Because, I mean, the last 2 losses to the Heat and then to the Grizzlies, like that's not a way that you want this team to be looking. And Giannis mentioned that as well, talking about like against Denver, I'm thinking that things are coming together and we're figuring it out. And then we have another down against Miami and then against Memphis. So with those 2 losses preceding this game, that does raise the stakes, I feel like, for this game on Friday, because you don't want your record to continue taking that downward dive and saying, like, now under Doc Rivers, we're 3-8. Like, you don't want that to continue trending in that direction, especially, again, with how they looked coming out of or into the break, and then just all of the attention that's been around the team over the All-Star break as well.
Well, and look, if you win those games, and I think we were fooling ourselves to think it was going to be easy, if you did think that, against Miami, especially with the players out. But if you win those 2 games, you're 37-19. You're still in 3rd place, but it's 2 back in the loss column and 1 back in the standings. It's much different optics, not even, removing the fact of the personnel on the floor that you lost to with the Grizzlies, but just the optics of sitting at 37-19 with a win streak going into the break versus where they are. That to your point, that changes it, where it's okay, as long as you look competitive against the Timberwolves and maybe it's a clutch game that you lose, but it's on the road and it's a very good team. It's easier to excuse that. But that, again, is kind of the spot the Bucks have put themselves in with this stretch of play from really January 1st on, where you've all of a sudden become the kid that is waiting until Thursday night to do the project that's due Friday.
Yeah, that's how it's seeming with this team. So like this is going to be a big one for the Bucks coming out. Like they got to get this game. Like, if not this one, then you look at Sunday and you're like, and again, how close Philly is to them in the standings without Joel Embiid at the moment. Like, you don't want to go into Philly and you're like, now this loss, like this losing streak has extended, and now we really, really need to get this win. And I believe that game is on national TV on Sunday as well. So like, there's more eyes on you at that point. You don't want to go into the game on Sunday on a losing streak like that.
Yeah, a lot of national games coming up here for the Bucks, and a rarity where you've got back-to-back Fridays playing at 9 p.m. And in the Midwest, in both of these games, Friday tonight, 9 o'clock in Minnesota against the Timberwolves, and then 1 week from tonight, Friday, March 1st, another 9 o'clock tip in Chicago on another ESPN game against the Bulls. So a challenging schedule for the Bucks, no doubt, in this second half or post All-Star break stretch. And a lot of those national games as well. In terms of what's up next, we haven't done the weekend show in a couple of weeks. We've had some scheduling issues. We won't have one Sunday either because the Bucks play at noon on Sunday. We will have a Sunday post-game show, though. And we teased a big guest joining us. He is going to join us. I think you know who we're referring to, but we still have to get some clearance since he's a big star now working for the 4-letter network that it has to run through PR, and just didn't get it in time to squeeze him on the show this week. But we do expect that guest is going to join us probably next week, and we can get his thoughts and what we've seen a couple of games into the second half. But look for that on next week's show. We will have the post-game Sunday night for your Monday, the Bucks and the Sixers, and also get to take a look, hopefully, at the Timberwolves game. Hopefully it's a game we do want to revisit from the Bucks with this challenging stretch. But a fun exercise today to kind of see, okay, what's the best thing that could happen for this team, and what is the dreaded worst? So hopefully you had fun with that as well. We'll be back over the weekend with a recap of these first two games out of the break. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you then on your next Locked On Bucks.